Good morning and welcome to the Crafty Canary for your tip on Tuesday. Today I want to show you how to make a reusable gift bag. Now this is a bag that finished measures 9 by 7, but you can make it any size you want and you can make it any season you want. Here I've made it out of Christmas fabric. That's what we'll be using, but you could do an Easter goodie bag, you could do Valentine's, you could do any fabric. You could even do just a plain solid fabric or a floral fabric and give it as a birthday gift, or even just use it as a little mini tote. But again, you can make this any size you want, and I will show you how it's done. So what we will need is to cut 2 pieces of our bag body fabric that are 10 by 11 inches. So 2 pieces of what we want on the outside, and then out of our body fabric also 2 pieces for the straps that are 10 by 2 1/4 inches. Then we want a nice lining fabric that coordinates with our outer fabric and do another 2 pieces 11 by 10 inches, and then some sturdy interfacing. I like to use a really nice heavyweight interfacing so that the bag has some body to it. The lighter weight your interfacing is, the more flimsy your bag will be. So get something that's pretty heavyweight. I'm using a fusible interfacing, but you can use regular interfacing. Excuse the iron, it decided to go off. And I'm using a fusible one. So I cut 2 pieces of 11 by 10 inches out of that as well. So that is what you will need out of your fabric and interfacing. To start with, what we will do is apply our interfacing to the lining fabric. So I have a lining here that is nice and red. I'm going to go ahead and press that a little bit before I put the interfacing on. If you were choosing to use a non-fusible sew-on interfacing, this would be the point at which you would sew it on to your fabric. You would use a basting stitch and you would go about 1/8 to 1/4 inch inside your edge and sew that on with a basting stitch. But I've got the iron here, so the fusible kind here, so I'm gonna iron it on. Now that that interfacing is fused really nicely to the lining fabric, we're going to put our 2 pieces together, right sides together, and we're going to cut a piece out of the corners here. This is going to help us have a square bottom on this bag so that it will sit flat. So I've got a little measure here that is an L-shaped measure, and it will square off my corners. I'm going to do 1.5 inches and cut out a little square in each corner. Now you can use just a regular ruler and do this yourself, but just be really careful that you get it as square as possible. I like to use this kind of ruler because it helps me get it more square than if I were trying to do it with my own eye. So I'm going to do that. Then I'm going to cut those squares out. And I'm going to pin my bag together on the sides and the bottom of the bag. I want to make sure not to pin the top closed, but just the sides and the bottom. And while I'm here on this step, I've learned over the years from making these bags to go ahead and do this now. Although we're not putting the straps on yet, we want to mark where we're going to put the straps before we sew up the bag, because they need to be 3 1/8 inches from the edge of the bag. So on each side here, I'm going to mark 3 1/8 so that I know where to put those straps. I'm going to do the same thing on each side. 3 1/8. Okay, now I'm going to cut my corners for my body bag. And when I do that, I want to make sure that my fabric is right side up, because if I were to cut the corner in the top of the bag, my ornaments would be upside down. So I see that my ornaments are hanging from this end pointed down here. So this is the bottom of my bag. Now I will also put these together right sides together, because that's of course how we're going to need to sew them together. And that'll just make it easier when we're cutting and sewing. So again, making sure that those ornaments are facing the right direction so that we don't accidentally have an upside down bag. So getting our measure again and making our 1.5 inch squares. Now, one last thing to do before we move to the machine, we're going to take our strap pieces and we're going to make them, go ahead and make those straps. Now what you can do, and what most instructions might tell you to do, is to fold these right sides together, sew down this side, and then turn that tube right side out for a strap. I absolutely hate doing that, so I never do that. What I do is I have a little cheat. I'm going to iron this first before we do it. And I fold them in half, wrong sides together. Then I unfold that and I meet that center. I fold it in again to meet that center fold on each side. Turn it the other way to do that. Being careful not to burn your fingers. And then one last time I fold it up, press it a little bit so it stays together. And then when I go to the machine, I'm going to sew very close to that edge, and I'll have a nice little strap without having to have the frustration of sewing a tube and turning it right side out. So let me do the same thing to this one. Okay, now let's get all of our pieces and go to the machine. So here we are at the machine, and we're going to sew our lining together first. I've started with my red thread so that I can do the lining, which is red. Unfortunately, if you have different colors of bag and lining, you will have to change your thread, which is not my favorite thing to do either, but I do like to have my thread matching my fabric. So we're starting with the red, and we're going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance on all of this, and we'll start and back stitch and go down one side, back stitch, and I won't cut until I'm done, so I'll just kind of pull that out and go to the bottom of the bag. Do the same thing up the other side. Now we're going to clip those threads that I didn't clip while I was at the machine. So that's really in the corners and maybe the beginning. And then we are going to press our seams open. Now we have to do it since we're on a flat surface and I don't have, you know, a skinny ironing board to stick in here. And really this bag is so small it won't fit on the end of a regular ironing board. What I'm going to do is just lay it flat and press that seam open. I'm going to do all 3 of the seams. And then I'm also going to go on the other side and do the same things, just so that it's really nice and open. I'm going to press that way. Be careful the steam doesn't burn your fingers. I'm always doing that. Now, to box my corners, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside, my hands inside the bag, and I'm going to put those seams together so that I'm matching this seam to this seam. And I'm going to use my quilting clips here, or I could use pins, either way, but I want to make sure that my seam is lying flat on the top and the bottom and pin it together. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Stick my hand in there, get those matched up as well as I can, and clip it. So now we're going to go back to the machine and sew a 1/2 inch here and here, and we'll have our boxed corners. Now we're going to turn our bag lining right side out. Having that heavy interfacing on it does make it a little bit challenging to do that, and you really have to kind of poke out your corners. But here we see we have that boxed bottom for the bag. Now, of course, this is going to be on the inside and not on the outside, but we'll do the outside of the bag the exact same way. So let's go to the machine and do the outside of the bag. So now we're going to sew the body of the bag together the same way we did the lining. So we'll sew up one side, the bottom, and the other side. And we're back to do the same thing with our bag body that we did with our bag lining, to press the seams open and then square those corners. Now we're going to square off these corners, and this time I'll show you how I would do it if I pin them together rather than using the quilting clips. So again, we'll match up our seams. The lining with the interfacing on it did make it a little bit easier because it had more body and held together a little better. But see, I have pinned, and I've made sure to pin through those seam allowances so that they stay flat and open. So now let's do the other corner, matching our seams and pinning those seam allowances down. And we'll go sew those together. While I'm here at the machine with my green thread, I'm going to take my straps. Remember, we had pressed those in, and now we have this edge, and we're going to sew really close to that folded edge, making sure that we catch both of them in there. And I'm going to back stitch at the beginning and end of this. Now remember, we had marked where we want those straps to go on the inside of our lining. Now you want to put the straps on the outside of the lining, but you can still use that as a mark. And I'm going to kind of center my strap on that mark. And I like to put, when I make straps, because I have this seam that I've sewn, instead of doing it as a tube, I like to have that seam on the inside of the strap. So I'll find my mark, kind of center it on there, make sure that I do, and I'm going to pin it on. and then making sure that my strap does not twist, I'm going to curve it up, find that other mark, make sure it's centered on there, and pin it. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, now I want to make sure, put my seams flat and make sure that they are pretty much lining up, because we don't want to have, you know, one way over here and one over here. If it's easier for you to make that mark on the outside of your fabric, please feel free to do so. I do it on the inside because I can see the mark better on that white interfacing than I could on a colored fabric. So that's just the way I like to do it. If you like to mark it on the outside of the fabric, since you're going to put the strap on the outside, that is okay. But now we're going to the machine and we're going to baste the strap on, just using a wide stitch, a long stitch to baste it. And we're going to go about 1/4 of an inch from the edge rather than 1/2 inch, so that basting thread will, for the most part, be covered up by our seam. Now, like I said, we're doing a basting stitch, so I'm going to set my stitch length to the longest length. I know you can't see me doing it, but I've set it to 4, which is the longest one on my machine. And I've got the green thread still in the machine, and since this is a basting stitch and not going to show, I'm not going to worry about it. But if it were something that was going to show, I would change my thread since I'm doing green on red. And for this, my bag is not really going to fit on here, so I have to take this extender off my machine so that my bag will fit into, my arm will fit into this bag. So I'm going to go a little bit beyond the strap, hold my threads, and baste. I'm going to pull that pin out so that I can get it a little better. Making sure to really securely baste that on, because if it starts to come out while you're sewing the bag together, you might have a wonky strap. It's not wanting to be straight. Now we're going to put our body bag and our body lining together. Now, thankfully, we've got the bag right side out and the lining right side out and the bag wrong side out. So all we need to do is just place this lining inside the bag. You want to make sure that you've got right sides together. So you could do it with the lining on the outside, but you just want to make sure that the lining and the face fabric are facing each other, the right sides facing each other. Make sure your straps are tucked down in there, and we're going to match our side seams. So we're going to come here, match that side seam, and pin those together. And I'm making sure I'm pinning through so that both are continue to pressed open and laid flat. I'm going to go to the other side and do the same thing. Match those seams. Now, I'm going to sew all the way around here, but I have to leave an opening so that I can turn that bag right side out. Otherwise, my bag would be sewn together like this permanently and we wouldn't see the pretty outside. So on one side, I'm going to pin all the way around. Ouch, I just poked myself. And on the other side, I'm going to leave a pretty good size opening. I'm going to go on the outside of each of the straps and stop there so that I can get my hand in there. Otherwise, if I left too small of an opening, I wouldn't be able to get my hand in there. It'd be difficult to pull that out. So I'm going to do my best to make it a pretty big opening. So I'm going to put my pin right on the outside of where that strap is. Put my other pin on the outside of where that strap is. All right, and we'll go to the machine and sew that up. Now, what I like to do, because the top thread will be going into the bag side, which is green, and the bottom thread will be going into the lining, which is red. I like to have green in my top thread and red in my bobbin thread. So I'm going to start at one of those on the outside of the strap here, 1/2 inch, so that will, when I get to the straps, that will cover up that basting stitch. And again, I'm going to back stitch pretty well here so that when I'm turning it, so I'll do a couple of back stitches so that when I'm turning it, it will come loose. Take both those pins out, make sure I sew that down flat. Now I'm back around to right before the other strap. So I'm going to back stitch before I hit that strap pretty good, a couple of times, and trim those threads. So we want to find our opening and stick our hand down in there and turn the bag right side out. So pull that lining out, pull the bag out. Want to go in and make sure all of those corners are poked out good. If you need to use a tool, one of those poking tools, you can do that. And now we've got to get that lining inside of the bag. So we're going to have to kind of shove it. And remember, it's the one that has the interfacing on it. So it's a little bulkier, a little sturdier than the outside fabric. And again, I'm poking the corners of the lining into the corners of the bag so that they kind of line up and we don't have anything bunched in there, and kind of straighten everything out. And you see, here's where our opening is. So what we're going to do is turn both sides under like this and join them up so that they match the rest of the bag. And I'm going to press that. And again, I'm going to be sewing from the top of the bag. So I want to pin on the top and pin that together. And that's the only place I have to pin together, remember, because that's the only place that's open. The rest of it is sewn together here. But I do want to go and make sure that I kind of make sure that the lining is down under the face fabric so that I don't have too much red poking out there. A little bit's not going to hurt anything, but I don't want it to be a whole bunch of red showing. And then I'm going to kind of press it so that it stays that way. Press this side. And we'll go back to the machine and we'll do a top stitch just around the edge here so that we have a nice even stitch around and we've sewn up this closure. You could sew that by hand and not have to do the stitch all the way around, but I think the stitch looks nice and it's much easier to do it on the machine than by hand. So let me get some loose threads cut here and then we'll go back to the machine. So again, we have our green thread on top and our red on the bottom. I'm going to go to a side seam and start there. And I won't back stitch at the beginning, but I'll back stitch at the end so that it stays secure, but it's not too bulky. So we're just going to sew right near the edge. So probably about 1/8 of an inch or a little less from the finished edge, from the from the folded edge. And just like that, we're finished. We have a lovely gift bag here that's good for gifting, good for using just as a mini tote, and you can make it for whatever season you want. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and I'll see you next time for another great tip on Tuesday. See you next week.